Hey guys, just want to explain this pivot tables assignment. We're going to do pivot tables for several reasons. Number one is they are a really useful tool in making reports very quickly without any sort of formulas. They're just drag and drop. The second reason that we'll get to next week is this is how you build Excel dashboards with Excel. Is typically you're going to use pivot tables, pivot charts, and slicers, which I will show you in this video. And then the third reason is that Power BI and Tableau and several other data visualization tools are explicitly built with a pivot table format in mind. And so when we get to those, you will see that they are very much a drag and drop, rows and columns, and they even call things like filters. They use the same terminology for a lot of what they do. So I find it to be very useful and an easy way for students to transition from this to something like a Tableau or Power BI or Domo. So that's what we're going to do. Now I've got over here, I say to do in this exercise, and I give you these 5 steps. This one called subtotals, when we get to drill or exercise number 5 or item question number 5, we'll copy and paste that into one of the new sheets so that you can, so that we have a list of what we need to do. But what we've done here is I've brought over the Apple data that we used in an earlier spreadsheet exercise, and I've taken a screenshot here in the middle and over on the right of the tables that I had you build for that using COUNTIF and SUMIF. And now what we're going to do is recreate them using pivot tables. And pivot tables are super useful, but they can be a little bit rigid, and it can be a little bit sometimes hard to get it to do exactly what you want. But if you follow sort of Excel or Microsoft's, sort of their rules, then it can make things very easy for you. So let's go ahead. I'm going to start here. This is our data. It is in a nice format. They call it a tabular format, which means that there are no empty rows, there are no empty columns. Everything has a header, and everything below that, like this unit sales, everything in that column is a unit sale. Just like everything here is a price and everything is revenue. The other thing, and I'll put this in a box here on the right, is that there are no subtotals underneath it, and there's no grand total down at the bottom. If there were, we'd want to delete that or copy and paste and then remove those so that we, because we don't want that, a pivot table will double count those numbers. Okay, so what we do is we click anywhere here in this section or in our data, and now I'm going to go up to Insert, and Pivot Table is this one all the way to the left. And I click on it, and you'll see here it's taken a stab at, it looks like your data is from A5 to F35, which it is. Okay, and then we can put it in an existing worksheet, or we're going to put it in a new worksheet. And in this case, we're going to just go with new worksheet. So I will hit OK. And then I'm actually going to go back here and grab this screenshot and just copy and paste it so that I have it here kind of just sitting to remind us of what we need to build. All right, now you'll notice when I click back on this, my pivot table fields list comes back, and if I click off it, it goes away. So I click back here, and what it's put here are all of the row headers from our data set. And to build this one right here, this revenue by geography, I'm going to grab geography and drag it down to rows. So it's put those over here on my rows. And then I'm going to put year here in my columns. So it's put them here in my columns. And now this is sales or revenue. So I can drag it here, or I can just click on it and it will put down sum of revenue. Now sometimes I've had it where Excel's thinking maybe you want to do a count, but we want to do a sum. And then if I changed my mind, let's say I wanted to do this one below it and do product, so I can click on this down arrow here with geography and say remove field and bring down product, okay, which now brings this one. Or, and that would be easier to see if I format it here with dollars. Okay, so that 19222 is this 19222 for iPads. The easier way though is to just left click on it and slide it off. and left click and slide it off. And the pivot part of a pivot table, when it shows these arrows, is that it's really easy if I want to put year on rows and product on columns. It's really easy for me to switch them around and just move it around, and it's instantaneous, or it's very, very quick. And I'm gonna drag product off because I want this one to be the geography. I want to mimic, or I want to match this one right here. Okay, which goes to 86,390, 86 or 186,390, 210, 989, 032. Also notice, I mean, these are billions of dollars, so when I put it here to dollar sign, it's going to put those decimals. When we're starting to deal with numbers this big, we don't need decimals. So we're just going to leave it like this. I find it easier to read. And I'm going to call this one, I'm just going to call this rev by geo. That's what we'll call this table, or this one right here, so that we've recreated this guy. We'll probably do on the next one, I'll combine this revenue by product and unit sales by product. So I'm going to go back here to Apple, data, insert, pivot table, and I'll go to a new worksheet. And I'll grab this again so that I can remind me of what we need to do. Okay, so right now I'm going to do this revenue by product, so I'm just going to drag product down and year on the columns, and then revenue down here. Okay, now the other thing is I'm going to slide iPhone up to the top to match what we have down here. Now if I were to sort it from large to small, well, let's do this first. Let's go ahead, I'm going to go ahead here, dollars. If I were to sort it, it would put iPhone at the top. I just want you to know that you can also, if there's a, sometimes it's like north, south, east, west. I want it in a particular order. And so the way you do that is I've clicked on iPhone here, and I'm going to slide around till my cursor is going to change and make kind of those four arrows. And now if I left click, I can drag it, and now it's going to put it at the top. Or if I wanted the Mac to be at the top, I wait to here and drag. And I'm going to just go ahead and find till I can get it. Sometimes it takes a second, and I'll just drag it on down. Okay, so that iPhone 141, 319, 061, 141, 319, 061. So we know that this matches. Now to build this unit sales by product, so this is the dollar amount of their sales. This is the revenue. One of the ways I can do it is I can actually select this entire table and copy it. So I'm doing Control-C on a PC, it would be Command-C on a Mac. And I'm going to go down here to row, 15 and paste it. And I can tell that these are two different, I'm hitting escape. I can tell that these are two different tables by going up here to my analyze, because notice that this one says pivot table 3, and down here it's going to say pivot table 5, and that's because during a pause in the recording, I made pivot table number 4. So I'm going to call this one, I'm going to call this product rev, so product underscore rev, and enter, and I'll call this one unit sales, so I can name it. Now in our case right now it's not going to particularly help us, but when we start building dashboards and we want to move them around, I find it often very, very useful to have them named as opposed to say pivot table 5 and pivot table 6. So on this one, what we want to change is instead of having the sum of revenue, I'm going to drag that off, we want the unit sales. Okay, and now if it's done this, I'm going to go ahead and slide this out and double click here to slide this out. And then this, since it's no longer dollars, I'll go back up here to home, comma, I don't need the decimal places, and just to double check, I have 216,757, 216,757. So I'm going to call this product sales or prod sales. So I've got revenue by geo, prod sales. Okay. Now sometimes, especially early on with these 4 quadrants down here, it was hard to tell what was what. And I found this wonderful, the PT there stands for pivot table diagram. This is where I got it. And so it's easy for me now to see if I ever forget what goes where. And so I haven't shown you filters yet, but I'll do that in just a minute. But I think the rows and the columns, hopefully the blue and the green here, are straightforward. Okay, so we've got now, if I go back to the Apple worksheet, now we've created the revenue by geography, the revenue by product, and the unit sales by product using these pivot tables. Now what I want to do is we'll take it up a notch and create, I call this long one here, the complicated table, because it's got, you can see that I've got geography here on the rows, and then on the columns I've got it product, and then year above that, and then I've got a total. So let's go ahead and I'm going to click here, insert pivot table, new worksheet. So now I want to do geography on the rows, then I want to put product here on the columns, and we'll go ahead and put revenue here on the values, and I'll go ahead and make these dollars. Okay, now right now this is over the 2 years, so this is combining both the 2017 and the 2018. Now to get this, I'm going to grab year and I'm going to stick it above, well, right now I'll put it below. So here you've got year below, so this is iPad 2017, iPad 2018. And you'll also notice up here it's got a little plus or minus sign that I can now break them out. If I want to split it so that it goes product below and then year above, I'm going to go over here. So it's just going to mimic what I have in the field. So I'm now going to left click here on the year. I'm holding the left click button down and I'm dragging it up just like this. Okay, and now I've got iPad, iPhone, Mac total 2017, and I can, you know, if I want to summarize it or break it out. And then over here I've got for 2018, and then I've got a grand total. And this should match if I go back here and copy and paste this. These should match. With the exception being that I've got the iPad, this goes iPad, iPhone, Mac. So 8.1, 8.1, 4606, and of course the total is 19,222, 141. You always want to double check this work. Okay, now since and let's go ahead and name this. We're going to call this one, I'm going to call it complicated just because that's what I called that table. And I just need some short names here. Now, one of the things that you need, one of the limitations of pivot tables that you need to realize is that I'm going to go back here, the Apple. In fact, I'm going to put the Apple data all the way to the left, so that typically what I like to have is my data being the one that's all the way here on the left, and then anything I build on it is to the right of it. But when a pivot table is built, it is taking a snapshot. They call it the pivot table cache, C-A-C-H-E. And what it's done is it's taken a snapshot in memory, which is why it's so fast that I can just do it on rows and columns, and it's not really having to recalculate things. The problem with that is, let's go ahead and I'm going to change this number here to 0. So I'm going to change the 2017 iPhone sales to 0 and hit enter. And now when I go back, you'll notice, or product sales here, you'll notice here that has not updated. And it won't update until I come up here and either hit, on the analyze, I can hit refresh right here, which is in the middle on the analyze. So now if I hit refresh, okay, those numbers will go down. You saw those change. Or I can right click and hit refresh. Okay, now that should have only updated, no, that's updated all of them. So normally up here there's a refresh, you can refresh, or you can refresh all. Okay, but if numbers change, you need to go through and refresh that. So that's what you need to make sure. Now I want to go back here and say, go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste down this multiplication here so that I've got this 2017. So here's product sales. Okay, so I want to go back and hit analyze. And I'm going to refresh all so that I've got this number back. Okay, so all of these should now match the 186 through 90. Okay, but that's just a limitation. So sometimes people are like, hey, normally if I do a formula and change it in Excel, it updates instantly, and a pivot table does not do that. Okay, so now I want to show you number 3 here, which is this drill down or they call it drilling down or drilling through. And this is actually one of the most useful features here, which is, let's go here. I'm going to go to this geography one. Let's say that my boss says to me, hey, that number here for the Americas, or the Americas in 2018, seems really high. So if what I can do is I'm going to do this total here, this 163,290. All I have to do is select the cell and double click on it. And you'll notice it's taken me, so that data is still there, but it's created this new sheet, which on mine it's sheet 4. Okay, and these are all the transactions that make up that number, this 163 million, and I'm going to show that to you. But those are all the transactions from my original data. And the idea that Excel had was, look, you can see all the underlying data that make up that number, and then the other idea is you could just actually right click, or you could copy and paste this, or you could just take this entire worksheet and email it to your boss or coworker or whatever and say, here's all the underlying data. Now, it bothers some people because Excel has formatted this as a data table, like a formal data table. And some people like them, some people don't. I actually don't particularly care for them. And so I'm going to show you how we do it. But let me show you how a table works. So you'll notice that a table kind of has this little kind of piece of color down at the bottom. And if I were to add new data below it, it would automatically expand to encompass that. Now I don't want to do that right now because I don't want to have to modify it, but let's go ahead. I'm going to make this one the unit sales. This one is the price, so I'm going to leave it as dollars with 2 decimal places, and then here is revenue that I'm going to put down with dollars and no decimal places. Okay, and then on a table I can add a total row down at the bottom, so that 163,290 should match that 163,290. If I want to add up these other ones, I can sum them just like I normally would. The only trick is, not trick, but and if I want to do the average, I can click this. The other way to do it is I can click this drop down and do average, and it's going to automatically assume it's for the total. Same thing down here, I could automatically do the drop down and I could put the max, the min, the sum, like I want to do the sum, and it's going to stay there. And you'll notice it's done it as the sum of unit sales, or right now it's doing a subtotal, but if I were to type it as a sum, you'll notice that right now what it does is it's saying the sum of unit sales. So it's using, in Excel they call these structured formats, or it's like a table format. You can also notice, let's say I didn't have this revenue column, so I could create a new column here that I'll call sales, which is just the same thing as revenue. Once I hit, watch what happens when I hit enter. You'll notice it automatically extended out, so it put down that this is now the border of the table. It's brought down the formatting, and now I'm going to say it's equal to price times quantity. So I'm going to say price, okay, times how many units I sold. So you'll notice it's using this table format notation. So I've got price times unit sales, and now once I hit enter, you'll notice it carries it down. Now in this case it's just 5 rows or 6 rows, but it would carry it down thousands of rows. I still have to kind of format that. Okay, and then I could put a sum down at the bottom that says, hey, this is, and these should match because they're exactly the same. So I can drill down. I'm going to leave this one as a table, so I'm going to call this one drill down. If I only wanted the data, let's just say I want all the 2018 data, so I double click here. This is now just bringing down all the 2018 data. Okay, and if I wanted to get rid of this as a table, the toggle is Command T on a PC. Okay, but I always just do it. I just right click anywhere here in the table, and down here you'll notice I have table. Okay, and the alternative to a table is a range. So I can just say convert to range, and it says, do you want to convert the table to a normal range? Yes. So it'll leave the format, but there's nothing down here at the bottom. When I click down below it, it's not summing. And if I were to say sales, it's not, like, it's putting that header, but it's not doing what we just saw. So you can just leave this here as sheet 5 or whatever number it puts down. I just want you to see that, but it is a very, very useful function that I end up using a lot that allows you to, they call it drilling down. In Tableau they call it drilling through, but it's very similar. Just say you're showing me this aggregated number, and I want to see what's the underlying data, what's the data underneath it, and I find that to be very, very common and very helpful. So now let's go to number 4, which is connect a slicer to a table, and I'm going to recreate this revenue by geography. So let's just go ahead, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy, right click and say move or copy, and we'll create a copy right next to it. Okay, and we'll call this one slicer because we're going to attach a slicer to it. So I'm going to delete this. We'll go back, and what I want is I'm going to actually move this year. So I want to add a filter first, and then we're going to add the slicer. So I'm going to move year from here, from columns to filter. So you'll notice up here, I can now, with this drop down, I can do 2017 and hit OK, or 2018 and hit OK. And then if I want both of them, like I can go back to all, but the select multiple items, with only 2, it's only one or the other. But if I had multiple, like with the geographies, if I only wanted to see 3 of them, I could select on that, and now I could just say, hey, let's do 2017 and 2018. Okay. Now, so that is our filter. A slicer is, while I'm selected here in this table, I'm going to go up here to Analyze, and I'm going to insert a slicer. And it says use a slicer to filter data visually. So, and we'll click on year. And a slicer is just another name for a filter, but I can use it with a button. So once I've clicked on it, I could change the style. I can make these yellow. Like I could choose this. I'm just going to go back to that default style. I'm going to slide it down. While I'm clicked on it, I could also make the columns like so that I have these side by side, or 3 of them if I had more. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and make them 1 so that I can just go to 2017 or 2018. Now notice that when I do the 2017 or 2018, notice here that the number changes. And that if I now use the drop down, so I'm going to say select, I can only do 1 at a time, so they're linked to each other. So if I change it in one place, it's going to change in the other. And what we end up doing is, this is a very common way if I give data to a manager, that now it becomes sort of self-serve, and they can slice and dice it. I mean, that's where the slicer comes from. You can slice and dice it any way that you want to. It's also the way in dashboards that we end up controlling them so that people can again, slice and dice the data different ways to see what they want to see. So let's go ahead, and I'm also going to add a chart with it. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go click back in the table, up here to Analyze. And now what I want to do is insert a pivot chart. And we're going to do this clustered column. And you say, what's the difference between a regular chart and a pivot chart? Not much, other than the fact that what we all like is that I can control, and then if I say, look, let's do all, that I can, this chart is linked to this table, is linked to these slicers. This tends to be why we use them, is because now I can build interactive dashboards where people can click these buttons and the charts change. Now I want to clean this up just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to get rid of this total because I know that that's the total. To get rid of these buttons, I don't particularly need the buttons. I'm going to right click on them and hide all the field buttons on the chart. And then I don't, since this is all millions, I would want to end up formatting this so that this goes 10, 20, 30, 40, or it said 10 and M, that sort of thing. I'm not going to worry about that. There's a way to do that. I don't want to get into that in this video. And then what I would do, let's go ahead and add a shape outline to our chart. Okay, and then let's go ahead and I'm going to make these a little bit wider. So I'm going to right click here. So to do this, I need to right click on any one of these bars, and now I want to format the data series. And over here, it usually starts with these series options, and I want to change this gap width, which essentially just, I've either got, so this, the 219 says that the gap is going to be twice, 2.1 2.19 times the size of the width. And I want to make that about 30%. And that way my bars become a lot wider. And this will end up looking better once I have to shrink these down. But let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and the other thing that I want to do here is put a descriptive title. So I'm going to call this is essentially my revenue by geographies. And then the only other thing that I don't like that I want to end up modifying here is that I want it to change so that I know which year I'm seeing up top. And there's only one way to kind of do that, and it's a little bit of a workaround. But we'll end up also using this a lot with dashboards, and so I want to show it to you now. And that is the fact that we can think of this little box right here like a text box, which means I can type in text. But the other thing I can do is I can make it dynamic, and I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to call this, in D1, I'm going to call this revenue by geo, or by geography. And then I'm going to put that space, or yeah, I'll put that dash there. No, I'm going to leave it just as revenue by geography. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is in E1, I'm going to concatenate. So I'm going to say is equal to, so remember concatenate is just a fancy name for combined text. And we've done those in a couple of them, like combining the last name and the first name and so on. So I'm going to say is equal to concat. And the text is going to be revenue by geography. So D1, comma. Now I want to add the space, hyphen, space. And then what I want to do for text 3 is I want to grab that year. So I'm pointing it to B1. And B1 is dynamic because it's going to change as I change the year. And hit enter. Okay, so this is now, if I choose 17, you see how that is changing revenue by, and you say, okay, that's great. That's in E1. How do I get it here in the title? Well, I just click here on this. And I'm just going to say, I'm going to hit delete. And while I'm clicking on this, I'm going to say, is equal to E1, and now that's going to click. So the other way I can do it, let me just go ahead and delete that. So I'm going to go ahead and add a chart title. Just going to give me a chart. So if I click on this, and now I just go up to here in the formula bar, and I say is equal to E1. So it's saying slicer. That's the name of my worksheet. Slicer E1. Enter. And now if I click this, now I can tell am I dealing with 2017 or 2018. Okay, so let me just show this again. I've got concatenate. In fact, let me make this bigger. Concatenate D1, which is this revenue by geography. This is how I add the hyphen with a space in front of it and a space behind it, and then comma B1, which has this year. Okay. Then all I do here is, all I did here was, so I'm just going to now, whoops. If I got rid of it just being this and I just said, hey, it's equal to revenue or total. Okay, but if I click on it, so I need to click on it so that it's selected this entire text box. So I ought to see these 4 dots. I go up to the formula bar and I say it's equal to E as in echo 1. And now as I go to 2018 and 2017, that will dynamically move. Okay, so that's what I want here on the slicer one. Okay, and then on the next one, let's go back here to Apple, see what we have next. What we need to do is, so we've done connect a slicer to a table. Okay, now we need to create the table I call subtotals. And so what that's going to end up being is, let me pause this. So I've brought over, this is the solution, what it's going to look like here, which is I've got these I've got the iPad, the iPhone, and the Mac sales. So I've got the product, then geography. I've got a slicer, and I've formatted it a certain way. So we're going to go ahead and end up doing this. Let me slide that off of the way. So the way I want to do that is let's go back to Apple. I'm going to hit Insert. We're going to insert a pivot table to a new worksheet. Okay, so I want product here on the rows, and then I want to put, I'm going to put year here in the filter, and then I'm going to put revenues here in the values for right now. And then what I want to do is I want to stack. So right now I've got product. If I want to put the geography, so I can break down, and let me go ahead and fix this. Okay, so now I've got iPad. I've got the products above the geography, and over here I've got product above geography. And if I want geography above product, I just left click and drag it up, and now I've got, so depending on if I want to see, if I'm a manager over a region, so I'm over the Americas and I want to see it broken down by product, I can. Or if I'm a product manager and I want to see how my products sell across geographies, I could see that as well. So I've got this one right here. Let me go ahead and add a slicer so that we can split this 2017, 2018. And then we're going to want to end up formatting this a couple ways. So I'm going to hit Analyze, Insert Slicer, and Year, because we're going to be slicing it by 2017 versus 2018. So I can see 2017, 2018. But let's go ahead and we'll keep it at 2017 for right now. Okay, now notice a couple things. I'm going to go ahead, so you see these plus minuses here. I can click them and collapse them down. So if I only wanted to see the summary, and then if I were over iPads, I could drill down on mine and leave these others collapsed down. I can also do that up here on the Analyze tab. I can expand all the fields. So just depending on, I can expand all the fields or collapse all the fields. And then I'm going to go ahead and click here and hit Analyze, and I'm going to collapse all the fields. And that's because I want to move the iPhone to the top, just like I've done. So I've got iPhone, iPad, and Mac. And all I did was, again, I've highlighted to where it, or over this line, so that it changes now to these 4 arrows. I left click and drag, and then I'm going to go ahead and do it again to put iPhone back. So I've left clicked and dragged, and now I'm going to say expand all. Now it's got it here in what it calls compact form, and I want to show you that. So like one of the things I don't like is that this one, like when I look at this 1922, 222, I expect that to be the numbers above it, but actually the 19222 refers to these numbers right there. Okay, and the reason it does that, I'll just show you up here. If I'm clicked in here, I'm going to go up to Design, and right now it's put it in the layout it's doing is compact form. I'm going to go ahead and put it in outline form, which moves these over. And then I could have it where it repeats all these item labels, or it doesn't repeat them. Okay, but I prefer to have the subtotals at the bottom. And the way you do that is I go to subtotals. So I could do not show. I could show at the bottom, which is my preference, and I can show subtotals at the top. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put them at the bottom of the group. And then I also prefer to have a blank row after each item. And if I decided to get rid of it. So again, this is a personal preference. I'm going to ask you to do it on this one that you're turning into me. But after this, of course, you can do it any way you want. So subtotals, yes. And I want them at the bottom. This one has a grand total for the, it has it for the rows down here at the bottom. And then I've done it so that the subtotals are at the bottom, and then there is a blank row after each. And I can only choose to insert or remove like one. So if I tried to do insert again, it's not going to insert a second blank row. It's just going to say you've already got one. Okay. So let me go back here to Apple. and this is the one, we're on this one that's called subtotals, and I want to make sure we cover all of them. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste. So I'm going to stick this right here. So we've moved iPhone to the top. We've made sure sales are accounting numbers with no decimals. We formatted it to outline style. We've done that. We put the subtotals at the bottom and inserted the blank rows between them. Okay, so now what I want to do is add, this is again one of the kind of the tricky things. I want to add, let's go ahead and add to the right of this, I want to add a % of total revenue and % of product revenue. Okay, now this part, pay attention here, this is going to feel weird. So I'm going to grab revenue down again and again. You're like, hey, we've put revenue down. So I'm going to call this one, I'm going to call what's in C3, I'm going to call that sales and hit enter. Okay. This one, if I want to do stuff with these numbers, I have to put them in again. So Excel's going to say, hey, sum of revenue 2, sum of revenue 3. This one, what I want to do is I want this to be the % of total. So what I want to do here is I right click anywhere in here. So I've clicked in here, I'm going to right click anywhere in here, and it's going to say show values as. And the one we want is % of grand total, which I think is also in this case going to be the same as the % of column total, and it is because this is a column total. So I'm going to go ahead and say show values as % of grand total. So this says that, hey, my iPhone in 2017 was 75.82% of revenue, and the iPad was 10%, and the Mac was just under 14%, and that adds up to 100. And then I could see, iPhones in the Americas, North and South America was just under a third of Apple's total revenue. Okay, so I can see that this was their biggest. Rest of Asia Pacific or Japan was their smaller markets. Okay, this one, what I want to do is I want to see what % these, like within a category, like what % of this 141 is the Americas. Is this 59.5 and this 33? And so usually I would just say is equal to this divided by the 141. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to click in this column, any cells here. I'm going to right click and say show values as, and this is going to be the % of parent total, and the parent that I want is the product. And so what I should see is that each of these should add up to 100%. Okay, and the parent is whatever, if I were to plus or minus this, that's considered, for these guys right here, this is considered its parent. Okay, and again, that's tricky and takes some getting used to. So I'm going to call this one, or let me show it again. I went to show values as % of parent total, and then I had to pick product. And then I'm going to go ahead and call this % of total revenue. And I'll go ahead and wrap that text and then bring it over. Okay, and this one, when I go ahead and say show value or value field settings, so you notice here I could have changed I've got a number format. I could change the custom name. Instead of clicking in the cell, I could call this like % of product revenue. And then I'm going to go ahead and wrap this text as well. Okay, so this gives me the dollar amounts. Then I've got what % is this 59 million of this 186, like the grand total, and then this is within that category. Okay, and this should then, so this gives me a nice breakdown. And again, it's very fast. And then, of course, if I want to split it between different years, everything works. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to add units sold and then the % of total units sold. So I have those on the same table. Okay, so let me go ahead and pause this and bring over the other one. I'll show you what we're end up doing. So these are the parts that we just did. So we did the sales, the % of the grand total, like % of total revenue, and then the % of its particular category. And now what I want to do is say the number of units sold, and I want the number of units sold, and then the percent, what percent of my iPads were sold in Americas, or what percent of my iPads were sold in Europe. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and do this. So I'm going to go ahead and put unit sales down here. So I've got the sum of unit sales. I'm going to right click anywhere here, and we're going to do show value field settings, and I'm going to go to number format. We're going to go to number, 0 decimal places, and want thousands. So this is essentially the same as pushing this comma button and then making it to 0 decimal places. I just want to show you there's this other way to do it. And I'm going to hit OK. And so now I'm going to call this unit sold. Okay. And, I'm going to go ahead and wrap the text in case we can center that. Okay, so that goes down to 279 million units. Okay, and now I can go ahead and say, I can do the same thing. Let's do percent of total and then percent within that product. So let's go ahead and we'll put, now this may get crowded on yours, but so we're going to bring down unit sales twice more. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and within each of those, I'm going to do value fields. Oh, actually, we don't have to because we're doing these as a percentage. So this is going to be percent of total units. And then, so I'm going to go ahead and say show values as percent of grand total. Now, I'm not sure this is as useful to us. But it does tell us, look, iPads are 15.6% of our units sold, but only 10% of our revenue, which means that the average iPad price is lower than the iPhone price, right? Which we already knew, but it's sort of underpunching, right? Whereas the Mac is the opposite, right? It's 6% of units, but 13% of revenue, which means, a Mac costs more than an iPad. And then on this one, what we want to do is I'm going to right click anywhere in it, show values as, and again, we're going to do percent of parent total, where the parent is the product. So I'm going to call this, I might even put a percentage sign, percent of product units. Percent of product units sold. We'll go ahead and do that. I'll center it. Okay, and so now what I can do, and to me this is more useful, although you're going to see here that I've kind of used the same percentage because I had to pick one price for the world, and then I used this breakdown. And so essentially I've kept this is artificial because I ended up having to back into that from Apple's annual report. But essentially 42% of their sales comes from the Americas, at least on products, 23.9% here in Europe, 20%, 19.5% in China, and so on. So now we have this nice looking chart that is easy for me to change the numbers for, okay? And then it also would become easy if I wanted to add, once the 2019 or 2020 numbers became available, I could add them to the bottom here and then refresh, and I would have all of this data. So I'm going to call this one subtotals. So for the one called subtotals, I'm going to call this subtotals. Okay, and then I'm going to take the Apple one and move it here all the way to the left. So now I think we've gone through all 5 of the things that we need to do. Please go ahead and save this and upload it. There'll be a couple questions asking you a couple numbers, and then it'll also ask you, were you able to successfully recreate the tables? And that'll be it. All right, good luck.